This panel is building better aliens. And all too often, the aliens in science fiction are either humans with bad nose jobs or make no sense biologically. Yes, Star Trek is famous. This panel will explore the science and logic of making realistic alien species for use in science fiction. Now, I will set out, we only have one living world as an example for what life is going to look like. So we have to extrapolate a lot, and it leaves us a whole bunch of space to do that. So what do you feel are the major elements that go into making a good alien species? And we'll start with Alex, go to Andy, and then move on to Rand.
Usually the best thing is you see the reasons behind it. A lot of times, whether it's instinct or something that's inbred, or a part of its the culture. That's one of the things that always makes the aliens of most books or movies something that you can follow and enjoy, because you can see the motivations, you can see why they're doing it. Whether you like it or not, you can actually understand it up to a degree. Any kind of a non-human creature that you're facing.
Okay, Andy?
All right. I think Alex kind of touched on one of the points I was going to bring out. You want something that human beings can understand to some degree. And that's part of the issue. To what degree do you want it to be understandable? I was trying to think of a completely non-understandable alien species, just as an example. I thought of something that was crystalline, that would land on Earth and suck salt out of the oceans or something like that, and never communicate with human beings at all, but be indestructible and destroy any weaponry sent against it, and completely uncommunicative. So that was what I thought of as a completely uninteresting alien creature. So what I did, I took alien creatures that were very logical, and they studied humanity for 200 years, and they tried to copy them. And then every place they fail in their copying comes through, and you see their alienness in the way they deal with humanity. So that was one thing. And then I have non-sentient species as well. And in that case, I just kind of made them a mixture of known human species. I took a fennec fox and combined it with a caterpillar and made it amphibious. And that was my alien species. I called them fox cats because they're very friendly and affectionate.
Okay. Randall?
Well, in media, at least, the main thing is that they have to look cool. I mean, so tardigrades, like that you can see right behind me there, tardigrades have become very popular in the past 10 years but because they look cool, and we suddenly, they just sort of took off. And so there's tardigrades powering one of the Star Trek warp drives, like the transwarp mycelial fungal network or whatever it was on Discovery. They were in Marvel. There's in one of the Ant-Man movies, as you're shrinking down to the subatomic level, you have to go past the tardigrade fields. So it's one of those things where a lot of what we do is just grab something that looks cool and then build mythology around it.
Well, that actually ties into my process for making aliens, because I tend to use a shortcut. To get the biology, the basic biology and structure, I'll take a Earth species and evolve it. And okay, the calentrozoids that you see behind me there is from my novel Cloning Freedom. And basically, they look like jellyfish. They're from a gas giant. They're hydrogen breathers. And there's certain key elements that I worked into that to allow them to be a sentient species. The dangling tentacles allow them to manipulate their environment, which is a key element. How important in your work is having these keys that allow them to be a tool using sentient species? Alex?
For the for the alien that I have in my book, it doesn't have tools. It's more energy based, and it affects the energy around the planet that it lives in, and it understood how to initiate growth and allow life to prosper. But I have it that it's been there for centuries after the last life form has died. So it's actually been feeding off whatever life is left on the planet when the ship that I have in my story comes into play. So it's actually being more instinctive to the point where it's starving and looking for something to feed off of. And I have it that it's reaching out, trying to find some energy source, some life to absorb. And even though it's able to create life and make things prosper, it can't do that at this point because it's just wanting to absorb something to sustain itself because it's been so long. So it can do things. It doesn't have like a sentient body, a physical body to make things, build things or use tools. Everything in that alien that I created is energy based, and it's pretty much hiding like within the under the surface of the planet, and trying to remain there until he can find another source of life.
Kind of the Gale hypothesis gone bad?
Yes.
Okay. Andy?
Okay, sentience and tool use and realism. So the idea, this particular creature that I was describing, the fox cat, is not sentient, but it's probably about as intelligent as a fennec fox. So I guess for some degree of sentience that's out there. It has a marsupial pouch. The actual alien intelligence is rather like Alex. Was it Alex or Randall that had the energy? Yeah, it was Alex that said he had an energy base. These alien intelligences are pretty much electronic, and they have great control over the four major forces of physics. So they basically can generate energy, matter from energy, manipulate electromagnetic spectrum any way they wish. So they have stupendous technology, and that's how they manipulate their environment. And they don't really have bodies per se, but I don't let the reader know that, and I will have them project human-like images instead.
So it would be more like a psychic manipulation.
Kind of.
Okay. Randall?
So one of the projects that I've been involved with, it's not my project, is called Contact. And it's a sort of quasi-academic conference that's been running for about 30 years out in California. And what they do every year is they start with a single species, and they evolve it forwards the way you were talking about earlier. They were founded by anthropologists. So they're super interested in tool use and culture and religion. And so these, what they end up doing is over the course of the 3-day conference, the first day is sort of like, well, let's try to get some kind of interesting, intelligent animal that we can settle upon. And then the next day they go up through, roughly agriculture, beginning technology. And then the third day is space flight. And then the end of the third day, they do a live role play between a future human culture and this future alien culture. So my personal interest is often more in the ecology of the planet overall than it is in one particular charismatic species. And so when I would go play with them, I would change the rules of the game a little bit and and introduce more biology into what they were doing than the sort of anthropological, here's a single species for us humans to interact with. They've been running this thing for like 30 years and have had Hollywood people and science fiction writers. If you go to their website, you can see sort of the archives of those kinds of things. My interest is often more in the ecology. So I'm like building out food webs and those kinds of things.
That I think is brilliant because it harkens back to a lot of what I try to do when I'm designing an alien species. I think you have to look at the environment as a whole because we evolved on an Earth environment, and certain things were defined by that. Our precursor species. You have to have an idea of what they are to get a good take on what your final intelligence, we're still evolving, but your intelligent species is going to be. You have precursors like Homo erectus and that Australopithecus to humanity. How important is a knowledge of precursor species and an idea that some of them might have survived and some of them might have been wiped out and some cousin species might still be around. When you're making a sentient species, how much do you think on that particular issue? And we'll go with Alex again.
And for mine, I do have the history of it on my own notes. For the most part, in the first book, it's just something that they encounter, and they suffer their losses and damage to the ship, but they don't understand it as of yet. In a later book, I do reveal how this creature had an original evolution, where it came from, and how it believes that it is the last of its species, because all the others it has not encountered any in such a long time. So it does have an origin behind it. It does have where its beginnings were, how it was at one point a physical being, and then it became energy based. But it is more geared towards the life energy of planets and the life energy of living things, rather than something that's physical and has to consume. So it's got its own origins, it's got its beginning, and it has. I have a couple other stories where it's going to discuss how the rest of its species did change from what it currently is, and this is the last of its species in that form. But being energy, it can change to something else, and that's what I address at a later time.
Okay, Andy.
Thanks. I was thinking about the origin of my aliens. They trace their history back 43 million years, and they've been traveling at sublight speeds through the galaxy from planet to planet, just basically getting resources to keep living. And their origin before the 43 million years ago is blank. They just seem to appear in the spaceship traveling between stars, and they had prime directives and purposes, but they don't know anything. It's a black hole to them. And I was thinking, well, what is the backstory? And my backstory, which I've never articulated before, was a species that was going into extinction and chose to transfer their personalities into the spaceship and also wipe out their previous history. And why, I haven't figured that one out yet.
Okay. Randall?
Well, I actually used to do a sort of an outreach blog and podcast for an evolutionary kind of think tank research center for the National Science Foundation here in the US. So I think about evolution a lot. I haven't actually, a lot of the work that I do is nonfiction. And so I write about evolution all the time. I haven't actually, outside of contact, I haven't actually like built an alien species that is the focus of a book. the most recent thing that I did was just talking about microbes on Mars. There was a short story I did. It's in an anthology that is where all the stories are set on or around Mars. And so, because it was a hard science fiction anthology, we're reasonably certain Mars doesn't have anything bigger than microbes. And so I made the microbes older than Earth. So they're more diverse than Earth is. And so they have, so where everything on Earth is basically DNA, RNA, protein, the microbes on Mars are more diverse than that. They have other forms of genetic material that that didn't make their way to Earth, so they're more diverse, and that turns out to be sort of a plot point in the story, because our technology is all designed around DNA. So in some sense, a lot of the stuff that's there on Mars is invisible to us, because we didn't bring technology with us that could find it. And it's going to take some time in that sort of timeline for them to even figure out what's there.
Life's so radically different that we don't really recognize it as life.
Yeah, that's going to be a big problem. I think even in our solar system, if we go to Titan, which is all cold rains of methane and chilly hydrocarbon stuff, I mean, I have no idea what we're going to find there.
Yeah. One of the premises I use in Cloning Freedom is that there are three major brackets for the living species. You have the carbon-based, like us. You have the hydrogen breathers, and you have the methane breathers. And that's coming from a documentary I saw a while back where they had a fellow who stated that all you really need for something we would recognize as life is solution chemistry. And those three environments can support it. What do you think about way out there, far out life? You know, things beyond what well, Alex, you've done that with an energy form. So what do you want to run with that? Kick the ball.
We've already seen how we've already been identifying so many planets that have potential life out there. At some point, we'll be, learning more about it, and as we go as writers, we can imagine where it's going to happen, how it's going to, end up. Whether we go out there and discover something new, or whether something new comes to us. From my story perspective, it's we're exploring other galaxies, other areas. We're finding ways to basically do jump drives where you can travel long distances in a short amount of time, or without having to worry about going faster than light, and just have it so that you can travel to these places, go see what is out there, what life can be like, and the options up there are pretty much limitless. You can go in any direction, like you said, hydrogen based life form, or carbon, anything else. If we just look at the potential for life in those ways, we can come up with all kinds of stories, and who knows, some of us may actually predict something that could happen.
Yeah, the shotgun effect for science fiction. Okay, Andy?
I'm kind of hindered here in thinking or imagining other forms of life outside the carbon-based life forms that we have here on Earth. As far as I understand, other bases such as silicon and others, but be wrong. But that's just my current level of understanding of biochemistry, I guess, and the energy levels required for biochemistry to take place. They get inhibited at very cold or very hot weather temperatures. some kind of thwarted other than energy beings.
Randall?
So this is actually one of my favorite aspects of what astrobiology has started to become, is that the people at NASA and places like that are really looking into the chemistry of how would you build something like this. And yes, silicon is not very reactive. So you would need high temperatures in order for it to, and high pressure probably in order for it to work. But even on Earth, I mean, we have silicon in plants. Plants use it to stiffen their cell walls. We have silicon in small amounts in animals, like the diatoms that have those glass exoskeletons, essentially. We use silicon all the time. You can mix silicon and carbon together to make what we call the artificial materials that we call silicones, which are like sort of artificial rubbers and have very interesting, weird chemical properties. So I think the hybrids of those things, it doesn't have to be pure silicon, but you could get some silicon in there and get some interesting stuff to happen. And the same with other chemistries too.
What drives you crazy about the gross structures of aliens that you read about and see? My thing is, I think bilateral symmetry. I don't care how many limbs you have, it's probably going to be balanced, simply because from an engineering standpoint, that works better. And evolution loves practical engineering. So what drives you crazy with alien species? Alex?
Yeah, very similar to that. Whenever you have, three-eyed aliens, or, I think, what was that, a while back, we had that Lost in Space thing where they had spiders that had an odd number of legs. And I was like, okay, they keep on playing around with this idea of, just make things up and don't explain them away, but everything has to have a balance. You have to have, something that if you have two eyes, you have to have, the vision that goes with it. You can't suddenly, have these, unusual vision where you have human eyes, but you can see into different spectrums. And it's like, well, no, you got to explain these things. You got to show them why is it. So it has to be a different type of vision, different type of thing. If you can see in the dark, you have to have that explanation for it. If you have multiple limbs, what do you do with them? Are they just hanging there? Or they, every time you see these tentacled creatures in different storylines, most of the time you're just seeing the one appendage being used, or a couple of them, and it's just, okay, well, that's what a person would do. That's what we would do if we had long arms or something. But if you have like a squid or an octopus with all these, there's a reason behind it. Use them. What would an actual creature like that be? And most of the time they just have them flailing around in all directions, and it's like, okay, that would not actually make any sense. Most creatures have a purpose to everything they do and all the movements. Same thing for life that we have here. Birds and even snakes. You would almost think you can't be attacked by something without arms or legs. It has its own way of doing things like that. If you create an alien that has something like, you have to, put it to use. Don't put, okay, it pulls out, it grows an arm all of a sudden. Well, no, use the biology that you've created. And several stories I've read, and a couple shows and movies, they do things like that, and I just shake my head each time, and I'm thinking, okay, give a purpose, give a reason, give us a logic to it, so we can think that, this is a real possible creature, and we'll follow the story wherever it goes. We just have to make it believable, make it understandable. Otherwise, you just walk away thinking, oh, that just made no sense whatsoever.
Andy?
Yeah, great comment. And you kind of touched on it early at the beginning when you said aliens with ugly noses. And the thing that drives me nuts seeing all the intelligent alien species being some version of humanoid. There's actually a pretty good argument that for bipedal bipedal transportation is pretty efficient in a lot of ways. So, but it doesn't have to be humanoid or ape-based. I like the idea of having like a tyrannosaur developing intelligence and growing nice long arms that could be used for tools, and then becoming the dominant species of its particular planet. So that actually would have some logic behind it.
If you haven't, you'd probably enjoy the book Farseer by Robert Sawyer.
Okay, I'll take a note.
Nanotyrannosaurus evolved into a sentient organism.
Go to Tyrans.
Okay, Randall?
Well, I mean, we all know why we do humanoid species, and it's because they're practically a lot easier to do when you're filming things. I think it was actually H.P. Lovecraft who originally went with radial symmetry, like your jellyfish there, and that's partly because he was studying the Burgess Shale around the Cambrian explosion. There's these fossil beds of some of the first animals. And so he was deliberately taking these very strange body plans just because they were strange. And that's the effect he wanted. He wanted something horrific, which these days, watching anime and things, you do get these flailing tentacles. And that drives me crazy because octopi are actually really coordinated.
Mm-hmm.
And very efficient hunters. They don't waste time. They don't waste space. They've got a brain in each arm. They can control those arms. and most of them are also venomous.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I am annoyed by people making the octopus or the, whatever tentacled cephalopod demon extra-dimensional thing is just a dumb flailing mass of tentacles. That's the one that does drive me crazy. And they even did it in Michael Chabon's Picard, right? At the end of that, you've got cybernetic tentacles flailing out of a hole in space, and then they just retract and pull back in when they turn the signal off. That drove me crazy.
Yeah, well, I mean, nature is very pragmatic. If it doesn't work, if it doesn't function well, it gets eaten. Oh, by the way, if you ever get the chance, go to the Royal Ontario Museum. Great exhibit on the Burchard Shale. Okay. So we're looking at limbs and intelligent tool users. One thing I wanted to mention is we've talked, most species are probably not going to be able to share environments as far as I'm concerned. Because even if you are both oxygen breathers, the complex interplay of life from your planet might be completely incommunicable to other life forms. It could well be a thing of your normal flora would become an absolute plague on another planet. Do you want to run with that?
Yeah, we're actually in our Mars rovers. Like, we're being very, very careful right now to try and sterilize them so that we don't accidentally contaminate any microflora that might be on Mars. We don't know that there's anything there, but if there is, we definitely don't want to compromise it. And I think that's going to be a broadly applicable thing, because the simpler the life forms that you're worried about are, the more widespread they're probably going to be. I mean, I think we're probably going to find lots of planets with things like bacteria and viruses on them. And then as you get more and more complicated, as you start moving up into multicellular things, it's going to be like it is here. There are lots of species of simple things and fewer species of big complicated things.
Okay, so well, why don't we all take a moment to plug our book now, and we'll move on and chat a little bit more about things in a minute. My book, Cloning Freedom, 120 alien species, 15 of which can cohabitate with humans, and there's 7 of which that can have recreational romantic relations with humans out of the 120. And I was probably being very generous with that number. Okay, Alex.
My book is called Drake's Orb. In essence, it's a broken captain, a rebellious crew, and a doomed mission. So it's a space exploration and a lot of twists and turns that pretty much leads them to understand that they're not expected to ever return from the end of their journey.
Okay, Andy.
Okay, I have one alien book with aliens in it, Paranormal Privateers, where I have a zombie family basically traveling around the world fighting enemies of the U.S. And then we have an alien invasion in the middle of it, and that upsets and changes the whole world at that point. And it's not couched as an invasion, but diplomatic mission where they share their technology with the Earth in exchange for some simple resources that we won't even miss. And then it goes on from there.
Okay. Randall?
So I've got a short story in the second Moe's 5.5 anthology series. This one is on Mars. I think there's 13 stories, each by a different author, not connected to each other. It's not like a shared world kind of project, but they are all hard science fiction stories set on or around Mars. And mine involves a mystery epidemic that breaks out in the exploratory habitat.
Okay. And I suggest that we all go up on the Facebook page after this is done and put our links in on the chat. Okay. Well, I'm going to go Captain Kirk here. And
Kobayashi?
sorry? Yeah. Well, it's basically, what are your thoughts on the possibility, breeding between humans and an alien species evolved in a completely different environment? Absolutely ridiculous. I don't want to get, even toss it out there, because if we can't breed with chimpanzees who have 98% similarity in their DNA, it's not going to happen with something that evolved in a completely different environment. That said, what are your thoughts on relations? You had Kirk sleeping his way across the galaxy. So, Alex?
So biotechnology, basically, if you have CRISPR or other sort of advanced biotechnology, and the genetic material is compatible, you can artificially make whatever kind of hybrid you want. As for alien bestiality, I don't know. All our sexual instincts are biological and cultural. So I don't know. I think there's a certain amount of ick factor that could be there, but there's also definitely a forbidden fruit kind of thing that culturally people will try all sorts of things that are not biologically relevant.
I think it would always be somewhat taboo, and I think that it would be a very small minority that would ever go for it. But I see if there are sentient organisms and it's possible, somebody's going to do it. That's just, there's always that percentage in the human population. But now, segueing from that to alien reproductive forms, how do you make a a scientifically advanced tool-using culture if you have a reproductive form where you spawn tens of thousands of offspring and 99 out of 100 of them are eaten before they reach anything resembling maturity? Ideas, because that's one of the major means of reproduction with life forms on this planet, that sort of scattergun effect.
Mostly that would be the genetic memories type of thing, just like spiders knowing how to build webs or birds knowing how to make a nest. If they're born with this innate ability to, recognize danger and try to survive, and a little bit more in their technology and their tool usage, even if only 1% survive, they will be able to go out there and live, depending on the extent of what genetic memories are passed along from one to another.
Okay, Andy?
Yeah, going off what Alex said, I don't know if you guys have seen the YouTube channel called Tier Zoo, where he basically takes a look at biology and treats it as a video game and rates the various animals based on their video game viability. But one of the big features, advantages in competitive environment of an ecology is the ability to pass on knowledge to offspring. So in order to do that, you have to be intelligent to start with. You need to have long enough life to pass on the knowledge, because some very smart animals don't have a very long life. Octopi and corvids can be like that. And then you need to have the nurturing or the caring for the offspring so that you have a relatively long period of time to train and teach them before they're independent. And we, of course, human beings have all of that. And if I'm going to postulate an intelligent species of another kind, even if it's one of your cephalopods or something else, it's going to have a long enough life, and it's going to have to develop some kind of nurturing or caring for its offspring, even if it's only 1 out of a million, that gets treated nicely and gets trained in the adult knowledge that the parent has.
Randall?
So an idea I've always wanted to see done and never have is, so humans are born with really big brains, and we don't have a larval stage, right? We are just small adults. But there are lots of animals that go through multiple larval stages of having very different, even different body plans. So if you built your brain as a developmental staged kind of thing, you could be not sentient as a baby and have lots of babies, and then maybe become sentient as a teenager. And I've never seen that idea played with really, and I haven't done anything with it myself yet, but I've been thinking about it.
That's an interesting thing to play with, because how much nurture would you give the young ones that are pre-sentient? But
I take it back. Robert Heinlein did something like that. His Martians in Stranger in a Strange Land had something like that, but he didn't lay out how it worked exactly. he just sort of mentioned that something like that kind of happened.
One thing I'm playing with in the Switchboard universe, that's where Cloning Freedom takes place and Freedom's Law, its sequel, is a waspozoid species that has multiple brains along its spine, a primary one and several secondaries. And when they mate, the female injects an egg by each one of these neural nodes, these brains. And the larvae devours the brain. The one that devours the primary brain becomes a female and has all the knowledge that has been absorbed by the male during its life. And the ones at the secondary brain become male, but they emerge basically walking, talking, and toiletry. And I just sort of wanted to combine a couple of things, which, again, it's a segue to what I think is one of the greatest examples of building an alien life form, which was the alien in the original Aliens movie, because he went through and took the most horrific elements out of Earth life forms and put them all together and said, here you go. What other great examples can you think of? Alex?
Aliens are definitely a good example. I also think about the Invasion of the Body Snatchers, all in the many different versions. Basically, something that can come in, get absorbed into our body, and pretty much leave us a lifeless husk, but take our memories, our life, and then replace us. That is definitely something that haven't played too much with other genres other than just repeating that storyline. But any kind of story that you put with aliens and ships and something, that's something that can be played into. Go into the biology, go into the different means of creating the life cycle of alien species and how they come out. For that, a couple of them, it was like little wisps of aliens that land, or not land, just kind of come through space and come onto Earth. But there's all kinds of different ways of creating life, changing life. And if it can reproduce in ways that we don't see and we don't understand, we could, one day end up visiting another planet and not realize it's happening, or something could come here and we won't realize until it's, grown into this being or life that we don't even recognize. So that's something that we can definitely play with as writers and science fiction novelists.
Okay. Andy?
As you were mentioning the alien species and as one of the ideals or one of the original ones, all I could think of for a good alien species was Larry Niven and Jerry Pournelle, The Motion God's Eye, and their trilateral creatures they created with caste system. And of course, human beings blunder into them completely oblivious and not understanding how the caste system of the different specialized creatures affected things, because their engineers are like super duper engineers, but they're not much good for anything else. And their warriors are super duper warriors, but they're not good for really original thinking. And then they have the breeding caste. And all those castes, human beings had to first learn that this was the nature of their species, and then try and defeat them. And the plot goes on, but it's a well-developed, well-thought-out alien species using certain aspects of Earth species that never became sentient.
Okay. Randall?
So stepping back, because I also love the Modis, Mary Doria Russell, the first book in her, she did one called The Sparrow. And so she's got basically mammalian critters, much more olfactory than we are. And so she spends a lot of time talking about scents and things like that. That's an interesting thing to play up. But the thing on that world is that there's not two different castes, but there are two different closely related species, one of which is vegetarian and the other of which is carnivorous and preys on the first species. And so that sort of dynamic and the differences between the vegetarian species and the carnivorous species is much smarter, more or less like you find on Earth. And so that's a good one.
Okay. Yeah, one thing that another thing that gets to me about a lot of media science fiction, and I know why they do it, but you always have them speaking English. And I look at it and it's sort of, there are so many different means that you could have communication taking place. Like with the Calentrozoids, if you notice the band of colored dots around the jellyfish bell, their language is in effect semaphore. Different colors, different intensities of light carry across language. What other forms have you seen in fiction, or do you want to play with in your own work? And how do you think that's going to affect how humans will interact with them, and just how much of a pain in the backside making a translator is going to be? Alex?
For my the current series, there will basically be a breakdown of communication, just because when they encounter this energy being, they'll never be able to understand it. All they know is it's attacking them and they need to get away. Its language, its purpose, its understanding, they will not be able to break through. I'll explain things about it in the long run, but for the most part in this story, they will never find out. But for several stories I've worked on in the past, there's been kind of like telepathy, where one being can contact another person, but not with words, but images. So we try to convey something in pictorial form to say, this is what you want, or this is what you're trying to convey to them. And it's an interpretation process, but you learn as you go, as opposed to if you're trying to learn, sounds or noises or body language, to try to comprehend a totally different species than yourself. That would just be like I said, a universal translator that you'd have to develop just to be able to speak to a completely different species or culture. For me, it'd just be the telepathy. It'd be a way of doing it, or having an intermediary, someone who can already communicate with both and be able to, bring that type of a character, that type of a being into play to the story. But other than that, it's always a stretch whenever you have two completely different alien species and they're all speaking English. You see that so many times in so many stories, and they don't always explain. Sometimes they're talking in their language and we're talking in ours, but we're maintaining it in English so that it just stays in one. And well, if that's the case, then you have to have some type of a interpretation process as you're going through, and that's never addressed. And like I said, popular storytelling that's going on.
Okay, Andy?
Yeah, that's always an issue, and it's a good example of hand wavium, that they just talk back and forth with each other. In my particular book, I have the aliens study humanity for 200 years. Basically, not only translated all of humanity's languages into their own understanding, so they learned all our languages, but they also absorbed all our culture and our memes, and can communicate colloquially in any language. And they basically send ambassadors that they've trained to each of the human worlds to negotiate for them diplomatically as well. But even with their unlimited computing power, which they had, they were spending 200 years before they were confident they could approach humanity.
Okay. Randall?
So one of my favorite treatments of this was Ted Chiang's story Arrival, which was made into a movie with Amy Adams and Hawkeye from the Avengers, where there's the big ship that lands and the aliens, and the whole movie really is just the process. They walk through the process of what it would take to translate an alien language, and that's the whole movie, right? Which is why nobody ever does that. And even so, out of the 30 different contact scenarios, 30 plus that have been run, that language barrier always comes up. And in the role play, I think something like 85% of those end in violence because of some kind of misinterpretation during that first contact scenario.
Yeah, and then you get into things that are completely out there, like, okay, their language is semaphore. How about another creature who communicates by scent? You know, anything, any sensory input that can be varied is a potential for information transmission. And really, what is a language except a medium for information transmission? Well, we're coming up on time. So what I want to do is go around and ask each of you to give your best piece of advice for making a plausible alien in fiction. Okay, Alex?
I would always say you have to give it a purpose. You have to give it a reason. If you can come up with a culture behind it, or a reason for its biology, that will always help you along the way. And like you were saying before, differences are what kind of bring the story together. Even if it ends in conflict, if you can show both sides of the story, you can always tell a very good story, because you can see the alien's point of view and you can see the human or whatever other character you're putting in there, and why these things are happening, and hopefully give a decent enough explanation by the end of the tale, and just go with it and give a good explanation, and follow through with what type of creatures these are, what type of culture they come from, why they do these things, and any reader will love it. Once you introduce an alien species of any kind, if you give them a reason for everything that's happening, people will follow it. Just like you were talking about the nature channels and these places where you look at the world in a different way, and you can actually put these things in, and you can actually follow them. People will love it. Readers will love it. And any alien you put in there, it's a great story, as long as you maintain that, and you don't break into these outlandish, just kind of take a shortcut and this doesn't happen anymore. Give them tentacles for no reason, give them a language where they immediately speak English when they just first met us for the first time. Just avoid those type of things. Give a good story and a good reason why it's happening, and everyone will love it.
Andy?
Okay, I'm probably just going to end up echoing a lot of what Alex said. I tend to be fairly hard in my science, and your comments about having an engineering purpose behind the shape and the outline of the aliens is a good one. I look at existing species on the Earth, because we have a lot of species variations that people aren't even aware of. Tardigrades, you guys mentioned already. And there's a lot of variety to choose from, and then you can add other chemistries as well. So I would hew as much as possible to known science and work off what could be and what might happen. If I have a furry amphibian, that's already kind of done with platypus, so I wasn't too far off there. I had, it even has a pouch, so that's not unusual either. And so that was my alien species that's behind me right now. And you want, as Alex said, you want that. And then your alien intelligence, you want them to have a purpose. And well, mine are simply to survive. They're wandering around the universe in this spaceship, and they use a lot of energy and resources. They have to replenish them. They can barely survive the interstellar trips because they're going at about a third the speed of light. And so it's a long haul every time. So they're looking to survive. They mention humanity is the first intelligent species they've encountered out of 40,000 planets. They've met over 43 million years. And so they were very, very careful with them. 200 years is nothing to them. So that was nothing for them to study us, and gave them a good idea of how to proceed.
Okay, Randall?
I think about differences. I mean, if they're going to act like human, just why not just use humans? Why not use bioengineered humans or things that we have made? Like, we haven't talked about robots at all, but that's a whole other set of possibilities that are pretty scientifically plausible. I mean, we're getting to the point where we can build all sorts of interesting things. But if you want to make something that is different from humans, then think about what their purpose is in the story and then sort of design backwards from that.
Okay. And the one thing I just want to quickly say is brains take a lot of space and they take a lot of energy. And when you're designing your alien, don't give it a pea head. Give it some space for that, for the brain to exist, because even though avian brains are more efficient than mammalian brains, it seems, with a size 2 intelligence, it still takes space to do it. Okay, well, gentlemen, thank you very much. And again, I'm going to stress, please go to the Facebook and put your links in so people can get to your books. And have a great day. I'm going to log us off now.